Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing well. So, Genghis Khan is a really formidable figure in history, and what's interesting that I have read thus far is that Genghis Khan, at this point in the journey of his story, he wants to conquer all northern India, right? Now, he has spanked a lot of territory in China, no doubt. He has taken out massive amounts of tribes, right? Well, he's on his way to go to India, right? But the geography, the author notes, and the climate had an impact upon not only the soldiers, but the horses and their weapons. So, the climate did not favor the horses well or the soldiers, and even the bows that they used. Because of the humidity, it weakened the accuracy of the arrows. Now, apparently, the accuracy rate of the Mongol archers was something very renowned. So this was a huge blow because their wood was adjusted to extreme cold and heats of the steppe region where they had naturally, obviously, harvested their wood. The wood can bend and adapt. Now, what's interesting about this is I have a deerskin drum, and in different weather, when it's arid or when it's rainy, the sound of the drum will change due to the contrasting nature of the skin and the wood, right? Because it's deerskin, so it'll either get looser or have a more of a ting sound when it's very, very dry. So seeing how this impacted their weapons is really quite a nerdy fact. So they head back. He dispatches about 20,000 troops to go over there and still try to have the India campaign. It didn't really work, and they retreated back to the environment of Afghanistan. So I think a lot of people forget that, except for people who live in Afghanistan probably, that Genghis Khan dwelled for a while in Afghanistan. I mean, pretty interesting. Because we tend to sometimes forget that he expanded quite far. We assume just Mongolia and China, but we forget how large his region was. But man, talk about having to adjust and how climate shapes the way in which your warriors feel. I myself dislike the weather of California. It makes me feel more lethargic. It's always the same temperature. It almost drives me insane. I prefer the cold seasons, the shift in climate, the cold, icy air does a lot more for me. And where the hot weather is, I just can't handle it. It gets above 70 degrees, I start to feel very sick. My nose will bleed and stuff like that. So I can totally relate to how these Mongol soldiers feel. If you're not adjusted to a certain climate, no matter how strong you are, your body starts to have a sort of shock. This was said also when the soldiers of Alexander went into India as well. The rain apparently got to them in the jungles. So, also in history, Hernan Cortez of Spain, when he went into Mexico, when they went to go take on the Aztecs, the tropical jungle got a lot of foot funguses on the soldiers. So, different climates for certain soldiers, really affect them. Just like if somebody's from a place that's super, super hot and they're trying to go into the rigid, cold mountains where it snows and ice overtakes trees, they're going to have a hard time as well. Definitely a cool fact of history that it's not just about geography, but climate, and that plays a huge role in wood weapons, and even certain climates wet gunpowder back in those days. Well, not maybe in the 12th century, but you get my point. Rust on certain weapons, ice, humidity. There's all types of elements that impact weapons. With robotics, I'm sure they'll invent something to where there's a sort of CPU that can get around weather fluctuations and climate fluctuations and such. But remember, we're dealing with 12th century warfare here. So that was an obstacle. Genghis Khan headed back to the mountains in February, and he lost also people who had to clear the snow. So this was interesting because he used prisoners to clear the path of snow for his army. So I thought, whoa, I mean, it must have been difficult being captive of the Mongols, because if you were a captive of the Mongols, they would toss you, help you fill it. Like, if their enemies, the Jerkid, remember? They dug trenches, and then the Mongols used the Jerkid's owed citizens to fill those holes in so that their horses could tread across. So, Genghis Khan, he's not afraid to use prisoners to do the dirty work and to save his men from having to do arduous tasks. So, contrast that with Gaius Julius Caesar, who made his soldiers build wooden camps and fortresses, and then they would tear it down and then light it on fire so the Gauls couldn't use it. Really interesting the way in which commanders utilize prisoners and their own troops, and what they make their troops do. Very, very interesting.